Hi, hello, Vinny and Dragon here, and welcome to another video. Now, I wanted to make a bit of an interesting, sort of different video from the videos I usually make, as I pretty much exclusively talk about Pokemon. You know, Pokemon is my favorite franchise, it's the one that I've dedicated the most of my life into. Pokemon is the franchise I've dedicated the most hours to, and I feel like that's the same for a lot of you, but it's not the only game I play. There's lots of other games I play. However, one thing that Pokemon does that a lot of those other video games fail to do is that they have a competitive scene. RPGs usually don't really have any sort of player versus player combat, and if they do, it's usually pretty obscure and not really a main focal point of the gameplay. But Pokemon is different. Pokemon has tournaments, prizes, world championships. People study for hours and hours in the lab of damage calculator just to figure out how to win. And so that brought an interesting question to mind. What if Pokemon had the mechanics of other popular RPGs? How would competitive Pokemon even look, or sound, or would it even still be a thing? Now, before we jump into the video, guys, I want to ask that you please make sure to subscribe and like. You know, I put a lot of effort into this video along with all my other videos, and I have a lot of big projects coming, so if you could just make sure you're subscribed. Most of my viewers aren't actually subscribed, so it would really help me out and help give me the support I need for these next upcoming projects. Anyway, let's jump into the video. Now, a lot of people usually think that Pokemon is too easy. A lot of the games are pretty easy, a lot of the more recent fights that are supposed to be difficult could end up just being kind of underwhelming, and that's caused a lot of dissatisfaction among the players. However, what if I told you that if Pokemon had the boss design of other RPGs, it would be horrendously unfair? Other RPGs are balanced around having multiple party members at a time. With only one Pokemon, bosses from other RPGs would be pretty much nigh unbeatable. Hell, there are so many iconically difficult JRPG bosses that just completely break the rules of the game they're in. And having that in a game like Pokemon just is incredibly unfair because of how unbalanced some of the mechanics in Pokemon are, and adding some unbalanced mechanics from other games would just really completely throw the gameplay loop out of whack. I mean, if you look at a game like Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, there are moves that give multiple turns like Beast Eye. There are moves that just completely insta-kill your entire party like Death Flies. There are moves that bosses get, which throw in multiple other moves all in the same turn.
This indescribable pleasure, it's all yours.
Not to mention the thing that other boss fights do, where they add time limits which just straight up make you lose if you don't win the game in a certain amount of turns. It's just completely ridiculous, and that sort of gameplay balance in Pokemon would just be completely unfair and rage-inducing. To go on that, a lot of bosses like to do this thing where they stack status effects. Most common RPG status effects are already in the game. Paralysis, Spurn, Freeze, and a lot of sleep and stuff like that, or are in the game in some other way, like slowness being added to paralysis. Overall, they do have a decent amount of status effects, and some status effects, like Bleed, is not really in Pokemon, but would probably be fine. After all, Bleed would probably just have a similar effect to things like Magma Storm, which do residual damage. However, there are some status effects that would just overcomplicate Pokemon, and there is a ton. Stuff like blindness, lust, nausea, fear, enraged, etc. would all just completely overcomplicate the game. Plus, being able to stack multiple status effects at the same time would just add more RNG hell to Pokemon, which already has its fair share. To provide an example, a status effect like Fear from Persona 5 just has a small percent chance of not making you act, losing SP every turn, which I guess would be PP in Pokemon terms, and just overall it's just an annoying status effect to deal with. Another thing Pokemon does different compared to other RPGs is turn order and crit rate. Now, some games, in fact most games, have a speed-based turn system, which Pokemon does too. Usually the fastest Pokemon in a turn gets to move, and then the next fastest, and then the next fastest. Very simple. Occasionally there will be things like Trick Room or Tailwind that sort of change things, held items, but in general that is the main way the speed system works. Now, because Pokemon is 1v1 or 2v2, you don't have these 4v6 battles, so turn order isn't really as complicated the way Pokemon does it in Pokemon. You know when something's going to be moving in general, just one after the other, one after the other, one after the other, just continually throughout the turns. However, in RPGs, even this can be confusing, as you have some party members who go, and then some enemies who go, and then your own turn who go, and the turns are split into individual party members instead of collective trainer turns. If Pokemon did have these 4v6 battles and stuff like that, all 4 of your actions would be done at the start of the turn, so you wouldn't get to react to what the enemy does, which overall, even that is kind of unbalanced. There was also another thing of speed in other RPGs, which is crit rate. Now, in Gen 1, speed directly influenced crit rate, and that works in a lot of video games. If you have a way higher agility stat than another opponent, you're pretty much just guaranteed to crit. However, getting multiple turns would shatter any sort of player versus player competitive battle, especially when some Pokemon would just have moves that give them more turns, or things that completely double their speed, which allow them to move again. I mean, Legends Arceus saw this with Agile Style, where you just were able to get multiple turns in before the enemy was able to do anything. Can you imagine that in a competitive setting? Plus, if you include the press turn system from Nocturne, if you crit, you just straight up get your entire party to move twice. It's completely ridiculous. Having Pokemon be able to move multiple times while your opponent can't is just so snowbally and unbalanced, it would just completely ruin the competitive scene. Next up, I have to address multiple Pokemon. Now, throughout this entire video, I've been sort of flip-flopping between there being 1 Pokemon on the field, 2 Pokemon on the field, or 4 Pokemon on the field. In Pokemon, we've only ever had 1-on-1, 2-on-2, and then for one generation, we had 3-on-3. Triple battles were fun, but not exactly well-balanced. And Game Freak has never tried to do a 4 versus 4 mode before. And having 4 unique Pokemon on the field with their own gimmicks, diverse support move pools, and just other ridiculousness would just be far too confusing and unbalanced. There would be tons of cheesy strategies like Triple Helping Hand Kyogre, or Paris Trap with a bunch of soundproof Pokemon. What if you have 1 Farigiraf on your field, which completely provides a bunch of support for all 3 of your other Pokemon? Just overall, this sort of stuff would be incredibly toxic. To add on to that point, in Pokemon, PvP is always 6v6, and the max you've ever faced in an NPC trainer battle is Volo using 8 Pokemon. However, it's still 1 at a time, or sometimes 2 at a time. Other RPGs, they just kind of throw however many enemies they want at you. There are 10 phase bosses, or a 10v4 battle. There's just no sort of semblance of balance in what number of characters can be on the screen at once. Just whatever the developer thinks is fair. Just imagine you send out a Garchomp and the other player sends out 6 Gible. Sure, they're weaker, but it's only balanced by that aspect, and it's not even really balanced. Overall, I love Megaten and Final Fantasy and all these other franchises, but it's clear they have some pretty unbalanced mechanics. So that's why I love competitive Pokemon so much. I mean, even if you could argue that certain things are unfair or unbalanced, at the end of the day, you're both playing the same game, and overall, the gameplay's pretty fit from a competitive standpoint. But what do you think? Were there some other RPG mechanics I left out? Do you think that they could add some of these things into Pokemon? Comment down below, and please make sure to subscribe, like, all that jazz. I really appreciate it. Now, get on out of here.